Well, that didn't last very long, did it? The Pecco Bagnaia resurgence that turned out to be just Pecco Bagnaia getting back to how he was at the start of the season hit a big wall at Mugello, one of his best circuits usually. He was not just comprehensively defeated by the Marquez brothers in the Grand Prix, he was also fourth behind Fabio Di Giannantonio by the end of it. This is the Race MotoGP podcast. I'm Matt Beer, Simon Patterson and Val Horinci are with me. They've had a night to sleep on Mugello because we're recording this one on Monday morning. Simon, in the early laps, it felt like all of us had reason to genuinely believe in a Pecco Bagnaia renaissance. It really went south quickly after that, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there was kind of, I don't want to say there was an expectation that was going to happen, but the whole magic bullet that he found last time out in Aragon, these new bigger brake discs that were giving him more feeling, he couldn't use them here because of the temperature issues with them, because the braking is so severe, they weren't allowed to use them. So what we saw all weekend, where he looked quite strong up until the start of the sprint race, I think was the Pecco Bagnaia Mugello boost rather than the Pecco's fixed all his problems boost. And that carried on through until the first kind of 4 laps of the main race, where he looked quite racy, looked quite competitive. And then it just, we reverted back to what is, the bog standard 2025 Bagnaia. And that was the rest of his race. That was game over, day over.
But Val, if anything, it seemed, well, was this worse Bagnaia than usual in the end? Or was it a little bit false because Di Giannantonio had a better race than he has for a while? Because to me, that early surge, it looked like a proper combative, believing in himself Bagnaia. And then the extent of the pace drop-off and the fact he couldn't even stay on the podium seemed like, rather than just maintaining his level, he'd taken another step backwards again.
Yeah, sort of, maybe. And it'll be disappointing for Mugello that he couldn't make the pace last through the race. Obviously, the front was not getting along with him over a race distance. He wasn't the only rider struggling with it, but he was maybe the only Ducati rider struggling with it. And it sounds like that the trouble he was having with the front also maybe contributed to him running out of rear tire by the end of the race. There was apparently a chunk missing from it come checkered flag, and that's what allowed Di Giannantonio to gobble him up so easily. But also, it's hard to say if it's worse necessarily, if it's a step backwards, but it's around that same band of performance. It just means that Aragon didn't mean anything, which, to be fair, I thought already at Aragon that Aragon didn't mean anything. I admitted, okay, the 355 thing is relevant. We still need more data on the brake discs, obviously, so they couldn't use them here because there's not enough hard braking at Mugello to keep them in the right temperature window. They can't use them at Assen for the same reason, which is a shame for Bagnaia, because that's the 2 tracks where he'd like to be at his best, because feels like that's the 2 tracks he can win at this season. And I think Assen will be better than this, I think, but it just kind of doesn't. I don't want to say it doesn't matter. That's not true, but it's we're not playing in the right range here. I think really my assertion from Aragon that I'm going to be annoyingly smug about in this episode, that Aragon didn't matter, that nothing meaningfully changed at Aragon, I think that was really verified immediately in the sprint, where Bagnaia broke out to the front, and then Marc Marquez was like, oh, okay, so I need to lead now. I will do that in 2 seconds.
Yeah,
I will do that in 2 blinks of an eye. That is not a problem for me. I can go lead whenever I want to. There's, again, Mark started the weekend talking about how this was a weekend to minimize the points lost to Alex Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia. I'm sure he believes it somewhere in his heart, but I think all of us couldn't help but roll his eyes. That's not the state of play at any place this year. That's just not it. Any place is winnable. He just got 37 at Mugello. And
yeah. I do think that Aragon was an improvement for Bagnaia, and I stand by that, because for the simple reason that the third behind Alex and Mark going into Aragon would have been a good result for Bagnaia there, because it's not particularly a circuit where he's been super fast. But by the same metric, then he should have won by a mile at Mugello, and that just wasn't there. It kind of sounds like the reason for the podium drop-off, he was pushing the front so much, and part of that was because of the Mugello buffer that you have when you're at a circuit that you adore. But as a result, he said that he was pushing the front so much that he had no ability to slide the rear. And as we know, with these Ducatis, you have to slide the rear. You have to use the rear brake to turn them. He said that instead of turning kind of smoothly, it was like jerking, and that was ripping the tire apart. And that's why at the end of the race, he was just left with no rear tire. So I don't think it was a setup issue. I think it was just him riding beyond the problems he had for the first time. I don't know, maybe for the first time this year, because we were at Mugello, and then that created a whole new world of problems, as it often does. I mean, it just looks miserable for him, and I don't think it's a confidence issue, because he has very realistic problems with causes for his issues. I think that he's someone who needs a very particular bike set up in a very particular way, and I guess you could argue that that's a confidence issue more generally, in that, Mark can ride anything and be fast on it. So maybe that's an element of it. But I don't think this is like Pecco's getting beaten by Mark, so his head has fallen off and now he can't win races. I think this is just a guy who's completely frustrated by a bike that he has no ability to understand. And that's a different problem. And it's a problem that, they could rectify over the summer break with some magic new part, and he could come back and still be super fast again very quickly in the second half of the year. Not super fast enough to challenge Marc Marquez, because it's championship game over. It's done now. Yeah. There is no way that you let Marc Marquez go to what has traditionally been one of his bogey circuits and do a clean sweep and think that he's not going to win the championship. We are 2014 Mark now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. But this is the point we'd reached in this season. We weren't looking for a Bagnaia title fight resurgence. We were looking for a Bagnaia self-respect resurgence as much as anything else. Just get back to looking like you're a guy who's won 2 world championships and led this team for so long. The trouble is, like, if the element that ultimately is what is unsettling him on this bike is something locked in by homologation, if the engine spec change that did get through was just enough to cause him a problem, then this just isn't fixable, surely.
For the rest of the year, yeah. But again, like, I'd say the rest of the year is kind of a bit of a write-off. It's just a get right, try to salvage as much feeling as you can. Oh, obviously, then they can rehomologate for 26, and they can do whatever. For me, it's easy to focus on that as the situation, because that ignores the other fundamental problem. So, but the mark on the other side of the garage, that's the fundamental problem. I'm not sure how you solve that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we're in a waiting pattern sort of situation here, because I think this season still, even with there's some 24-25 weirdness certainly going on. Very confident of that. But I think this season also falls neatly into our expectation from last season. If we just bake in the thinking that the 23 was so much worse than the 24, like just leaps and bounds worse, like half a second per lap worse. You add that half a second this season, of course Mark's doing the thing every weekend. And the other GP23 to GP24, Alex Marquez, also massive step forward. It's easier to explain it with that for me than an alarming Bagnaia drop-off. He's clearly not comfortable. He's clearly not his best self, but I don't think he's that far off necessarily. I think it's too tempting to explain it as just, Bagnaia's tripped over his shoelaces with the new spec. Ducati has given him something wrong, etc. There'll be a part of that, but I think the gap to Mark, I don't think is contained fully or even mostly in that part.
The kind of most amusing part of Pecco's post-race debrief on Sunday was the bit where he kind of started questioning us about the homologation rules, and kind of had the sudden realization that he can actually go back to GP24 next year because it's been homologated for Franco Morbidelli and the guys in the year-old bike. So it's still homologated. So you can move between homologations even though that's frozen for 2 years. And I genuinely think that was the most relieved that I've seen him in quite some time, whenever he realized that he can actually ride it again.
The trouble with that homologation is that it does seem to have a magnet attracting it to other bikes, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Well, Alex Marquez has a magnet repelling it from other bikes. So
we'll talk about that in a minute, or about one bike in particular, arguably. Just to finish off on the Bagnaia non-resurgence thing, looking at the questions from the Race Members Club on Patreon, there's a real feeling that this was turning point's the wrong word. It's like a non-turning point. It's like a straight line from here point. We've talked so much about Bagnaia's struggles this season, but this felt significant because, one, it's Mugello, where you expect him to go well. Two, it came after Aragon, where something encouraging happened. And three, the fact that it just tumbled from such a strong-looking start to not even being on the podium. So I'm just going to run through a few of the kind of more existential moment for Bagnaia comments from the Members Club. Hayes said that he found it a very kind of predictable MotoGP race, explosive first few laps, they get strung out. But he says, I found the Pecco narrative so compelling for the entire race. It felt like this was a make or break weekend for him, and there seems to be a level of desperation in his riding and his attempts to cling on to the podium. Angelina says, I never saw Pecco win the championship this year, but honestly, at what point do we have to wonder if second place isn't happening either? We're 9 races in, he's looking more and more defeated. Ali says, I imagine leaving here knowing how strong he's been in the last few years. His outlook for Assen has been affected negatively as well. Eric Yip says, I wonder, does Bagnaia just use all his tyre up, or is he just mentally gone? Oscar Robledo said, did Bagnaia have a problem with his bike, or was it just capitulation after DJ overtook him in the final laps? And Frank Quinn says, barring Assen, maybe, would this have been the equivalent of Pecco beating Marc Marquez at the Sachsenring in terms of how favoured it was for one rider over the other? And of course, it went the other way. Do you guys get why this has felt like for so many of the fans and the members, this felt like such a significant, any faith we had left in Pecco this season is kind of gone after this race?
Yeah, the Sachsenring comparison is pretty apt, I think. This is Pecco's circuit. This is the only place where he's been able to consistently win sprint races, which is quite telling in itself. And then yet, just nothing. Yeah, I think the Sachsenring comparison is a good one. This and Assen are his Sachsenring and Kota.
Yeah, but except his Sachsenring and Kota aren't Sachsenring and Kota, right? So that's also another thing we've learned today. Other riders don't do that sort of Sachsenring and Kota thing where you show up riding a motocross bike or whatever on the track and still win the race. That's available to only a select few. And again, I don't want this whole podcast to devolve into just, isn't Marc Marquez great? Isn't Marc Marquez the fastest, the best? Because that gets really boring very quickly. But
also
that's the lesson of this year.
When we talk about Kota and Sachsenring and Marc, what he's done there, because it started before the Premier class as well, it redefines what a rider having a good circuit means. Now, you could talk about Valentino Rossi at Mugello way back as well. And I think that kind of was in similar territory, but it didn't hold for his whole career in the same way. But because Marc has those records at those particular tracks, you think of someone having a strong circuit and you expect a Marc at Kota, at Sachsenring kind of moment. And actually, no, what he's doing there is absolutely next level, even for a favoured circuit.
I think Pecco Bagnaia at Mugello is Alex Marquez at Sepang. It's Marco Bezzecchi at Assen. Yeah. Also Pecco Bagnaia at Assen a little bit. But you know what I mean. I can't think of any of the Aleix Espargaro in Barcelona.
Yeah.
That's, that kind of thing. I don't think it's not Sachsenring and Kota, because that doesn't happen.
Today's episode is sponsored by Insta360, a leader in 360-degree action camera technology and a partner of World Championship leader and Mugello dominator Marc Marquez. They recently launched their X5 camera, a new 360-degree camera which shoots in all directions at once in incredible 8K 30 frames per second resolution for epic motorcycling shots without even having to worry about where the camera is pointing. Just hit record, focus on your ride, and find the best angles in the edit with Insta360's mobile app. It's easy, smooth, and uses AI to help you create everything from shots looking back at you and your friends to racing-style gyroscope action that captures the flow of your rides. See more of your handlebars with an immersive point of view or shoot unique third-person shots of you, your bike, and your riding buddies. X5 is every camera you'll need in one, whether you're an everyday rider or a 6-time MotoGP champion like Marc Marquez. From morning commutes to night rides through the city and everything in between, X5's huge sensors, AAA chip, and dedicated low-light shooting mode deliver unmatched detail and image quality around the clock. It's waterproof, reliable, and features Insta360's toughest ever lenses and lens guards, both of which are completely replaceable, meaning you can be confident of taking it off-road as well as on and riding anywhere that the road can throw at you. When combined with Insta360's extensive selection of accessories, you can mount your camera anywhere on your bike to get it just the right shot. And with a built-in wind guard, noise-cancelling algorithms, and compatibility with common Bluetooth communication systems from Senna, Cardo, and others, your videos will have crisp, clear audio and the ability to record your own commentary as you ride. To bag a free replacement lens kit worth £29.99 with your Insta360 X5 purchase, head to the link in the description below and use promo code THERACE, all capitals, available for the first 30 purchases only. And for more information, be sure to check out the link in the description. So Bagnaia gave Racing Marquez a very good go for a few laps, then disappeared. Then it was Marquez versus Marquez, Alex and Mark duking it out at the front again, or was it? This is something that became a bit of a hot topic on the Mugello Sunday afternoon. Is Alex going too easy on Mark? Alex has been a bit of a feisty / Larry / chaotic racer through his time in MotoGP. Is he deliberately making it a little bit too gentle when he's going wheel to wheel with his brother? Couple of contrasting opinions from the members club on this. Well, I don't know if it's contrasting or not. Annie says, Simon, you claimed Alex doesn't race Mark properly. I'd love to hear you elaborate more on that, and I'm curious if the others agree, which, Annie, your tone there suggests that you're not so sure about this. Whereas Paul McClenaghan is more flat out going, what is going on with Alex? Once he duffed it out for a few laps, he seemed to let Mark run on. So, Simon, you can open this, because I'm imagining this started off with a kind of social media comment that then became a pleasant conversation.
Yeah, charming.
Yep. Does Alex let Mark win too easily?
So the first thing I have to correct you on is that you said deliberately, and I've never said it was deliberate. Right? Okay. I think I genuinely, I'm not saying that there's collusion. I'm not saying that the two of them have worked out some sort of a, Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby, Carl Naughton Jr. deal where one finishes first and the other finishes second every week. I think it's just subconscious. I think he just isn't as aggressive with Mark as he is with other riders. And one of the people we spoke to about this on Sunday evening was Pecco, who said basically he thinks the same thing, but he understands it because he's not as aggressive with the VR46 Academy riders. But I think Alex's logic doesn't stand up for me whenever we talk to him about it, because he said that he absolutely doesn't race Mark any differently, and that it's just that Mark is faster than him and that he only tries to overtake riders who are faster or who he's faster than. That's not true. That is not true at all. Alex Marquez has made a career out of trying to overtake people who are way faster than him in absolutely stupid ways. And I don't buy that he's suddenly found confidence and consistency whenever occasionally he's still very keen to kind of show a fairly aggressive wheel to people like Pecco, but then seems quite unable to do similar to Mark. Like I said, it's not a strategy. It's not a deliberate. They're brothers. There is an element of it that I think is just going to happen. But I think that, I'm not saying this because I think it's bad for the sport. I'm saying it because I think it's bad for Alex. Because, we've already talked this week about how Alex essentially has put himself into contention for factory rides in the next contract cycle in 2027. And say you're Yamaha, say you hire Alex Marquez, say that it turns out that your bike is better than everyone else's bike, and that Mark is still riding a Ducati that isn't the best bike in the grid anymore, and suddenly he's beatable, but you need to do it by being because he's going to be super aggressive, so you need to do that back again. Would Alex Marquez be your choice then to ride the bike? Would he be the guy that you'd think, he's going to give that aggression back to Marquez the way that a Jorge Martin or even a Fabio Quartararo would? And that's why I'm saying it. I think Alex maybe needs to realize that he is being a little bit softer on Mark than he would otherwise, and that it might end up being something that kind of harms him in the long run, which would be quite ironic after a guy who's spent his entire career being told that he's only got everything he's got, including his 2 world championships, because he's Mark's brother.
Val, you made a noise and face of slight skepticism halfway through that. Well, if you're watching on YouTube, you'd have seen that. If you're listening in the audio version, you might have even heard the kind of noise that came out of you.
Well, I made the noise and face because I think Alex's reputation for being an on-track menace from the past years, I think, was a bit... I'm not sure I totally bought into it. I think there's other guys on the grid.
Ask Pecco Bagnaia if he agrees.
Yeah, that one was like 60-40. I know, and if
That was
that's
a very
the first one,
attention-grabbing one,
if that's
wasn't
the
it?
first one that comes to mind, I
Actually,
think that
no. The one that first comes to mind for me because of where
is
we
the
are
Miller one.
is the Mugello one last year, where he basically threaded the needle. Do you remember between?
Yes.
Was it between Bagnaia and Mark?
I
And
think
he just
so.
got completely out of control over turn one and just about saved taking out Pecco.
But
That's
also, I
the
don't
one
think
that
that was a
stands out to
move.
me,
I think
actually.
that was the classic slipstream problem.
Yeah, but then he used
riders
He
tend to
used the
have.
same move on Sunday to quite safely pass Mark.
He looked quite robust in some moments on Sunday too. This Sunday, I think he does give Mark more margin, and I think that makes total sense for where he is at this point, because it's just better not to have a feud with your brother. It's just better to continue this current cooperation that they have that seems to be working out okay for everybody involved, where they clearly talk through everything every weekend. They clearly even discuss pre-race. They discuss the strategies they're going to have to a certain extent. That's almost unforeseen for title rivals, but it's how they work. When they're clearly, their brotherly bond is almost more significant than the MotoGP World Championship, and that can be annoying. I see why that's incongruent, why that's maybe not conducive to the best title battle. I also think that the way he races, because clearly he wants to win, and if given the chance, he would win. I think he accepts maybe too easily, but also I get it, that like just going in, seeing Mark go through and going, okay, not today. Today's not the day. I think he accepts too easily that at the end of the race, there's not going to be stopping Mark. So you might as well just follow him and maximize your race result. And when Mark is the championship leader, you don't want the championship rival to race that way. You want the championship rival to try to cost him points, not have him off, but, rough him up, make him use up the tires, put him in uncomfortable positions, make it so there's, so you don't just lose the 5 points and accept it, but you try to make something happen outside of the pace of the race, the normal performance. Because on normal performance, I think Alex does see, Mark has us today and decides, I'm just going to finish second. That's the best for my championship. And then we'll see into the next round.
Basically, what you're describing is the Andrea Dovizioso strategy for beating Marc Marquez in a title race.
Kind of, yeah, a little bit.
That's how Dovi played like 17, 18.
Yeah, but with more last corner dive bombs to steal race wins thrown in.
That's because front tire pressures are the most useless thing ever invented. You can't do that anymore. But Dovi controlled races around him more as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's fair.
These two are also on, for all the GP25, GP24 differences, these two are on the same bike, whereas Dovi obviously had a Ducati that was stronger than the Honda in certain areas, not as strong in other areas. They were opposing machines, and it was still not the Ducati that is the insane all-rounder that it is right now. But I do think that Alex, I'm sure he wants to win the title, and I honestly, there's a small part of me that wonders whether Mark would be okay. Like if he imagines the end of the year that Alex somehow wins the title, he's like, I'm fine with that. Whatever. I have 6. I have 6. I love my brother. If he can get one in a way that doesn't look that I've given it to him, maybe that's totally okay. But I think both of them understand that the only way this happens isn't by Alex roughing up Mark on track for the lead or whatever, etc., but by Mark giving it to him in a different way, which is to say, continuing to just randomly crash out on lap 1, 2 on heavy fuel. And the margin is growing a little too big already to rely on that, but I don't think there's another way. So in a sense, I also understand why Alex is racing in a way to maximize his time spent second in the championship, to sort of maximize the pure points while maybe robbing himself of the ceiling. Again, this goes back to Bagnaia. We've seen how it worked out to go gung-ho in the early laps for Pecco Bagnaia in this race. It worked out by ending up off the podium. But he didn't finish on the podium. He lost 7 points relative to Alex in that race. And Alex has discovered a way to plan out these races this year where he picks up more or less the maximum available points, where his pace doesn't sag hugely at the end of the races like it used to. I get it. Should it bother me? It shouldn't bother me, because it doesn't bother me, because I don't believe in this title battle the way title battles normally work. To beat Mark, Alex, as good as he's been this season, needs Mark to trip over his own shoelaces. He does not need to tie Mark's shoelaces. That won't be enough. Mark needs to start making unforced errors of his own again.
For Alex to stamp on Mark's shoelaces with a long distance out braking maneuver from a long way back that just barrels him out of the way. I'm very prepared to give Alex the benefit of the doubt on the how hard he races or doesn't race Mark thing, because I think it's unfortunate for us as fans of MotoGP followers, and unfortunate for the rest of MotoGP generally, that we've ended up in a situation where the two best packages on the grid in terms of competitive bike with right team, with riders in a happy place with that bike, happen to be with two brothers. And at the start of the season, and I think they're still to a degree in start of the season mode in the way they're talking, I don't think either of them would have expected things to go on this long in this way. Alex would have been thinking, okay, when is my year-old bike going to drop off relatively development-wise? Mark would have been thinking, when's Bagnaia going to kind of find his feet in what has been his team that I've just arrived in? I don't imagine for a second around Thailand time they were thinking family 1-2s all year, hooray. If they had been, I think there might have been more of an expectation they could go head-to-head for a title. But even then, Alex knows Mark better than anyone else in the universe. Does Alex really, really believe deep down he can beat his brother to a world championship through sheer racecraft and pace, even if they're on equal bikes? I genuinely doubt it, as close as they are. So I think Alex is racing in, I've got this opportunity to be this high up in the championship, to get this many podiums, to maybe win some races mode. He's racing like someone who has to be a little bit cautious because they don't know how long this will last, and he's trying to maximize his opportunities. Then you put in what I think is, like you say, a subconscious feeling of, it's my brother, this is a bit different. I think Pecco saying that he races other VR46 guys differently is in some ways more concerning, because there's loads of them. Val, this might be a mission for you on a quiet day, which you will never ever have, to actually look at some of the races, the battles between like Pecco versus Morbidelli and stuff versus Alex versus Mark, and just see if how much of a difference there is. I do think there's a trend in MotoGP of seeing certain people going easier on each other and alliances forming. But you can look at that with Aleix Espargaro and Jorge Martin as well. Friendships, fraternal relationships, and actual siblinghoods all over the place on this grid. So I don't think it's as simple as Alex letting Mark win. It does. I'm going to make a tiny retro F1 diversion. Apologies to maybe 2/3 of our audience, but it keeps reminding me of Michael Schumacher, Ralf Schumacher in F1 in the 2000s, when Ralf Schumacher had a reputation for never attacking his brother properly as much as someone like Ralph's then Williams teammate Juan Pablo Montoya would do. Whereas Michael had no worries about weaving Ralph into a pit wall if necessary. And it was a kind of older brother dominance in the head kind of thing, where you just never thought Ralph believed it was worth trying a proper move on his brother, because he was obviously going to get beaten. The big brother was in the little brother's head too much. I think these two get along a lot better than Marquez is. And I do think Mark would be very happy to see Alex beat him to a title, but not this one. Not this first title after the 2020 injury, after such a long drought. Next year, if Alex's form holds up and the year-old bike's potential holds up, maybe I can see Mark being a little bit more chilled, but not this one. If you're watching this on the YouTube version, you may see Simon at a slight different angle now, because he swapped chairs at the end of that conversation to resolve. Yeah, a mid-season ergonomic change of the kind.
Flag to flag.
Yeah. What am I in here, Bastianini?
Exactly, yeah. You may have noticed a lot of wriggling during the previous segment, so it might be a Bastianini-style transformation for the rest of this podcast. Aside from Bagnaia's sad weekend, the biggest topic they was talking about at the end of Mugello was Franco Morbidelli's latest on a long list of incidents. In this case, they basically cleaned Maverick Vinales off the track, got what became a double long lap for it, because he couldn't take the first long lap competently enough for it to actually stick. This one has really enraged people online and in the members club. Stuart Calder says, if MotoGP hadn't dispensed with penalty points, presumably Franco would have at least one race ban in his career by now. Northern Bastard said Morbidelli is a menace. Should he get another season? Mulder says, I'm honestly shocked Morbidelli only got a long lap for what was clearly an overambitious, aggressive overtake that led to the end of Vinales' race. Does the penalty system need to be reviewed? And Tim Harder says, this season hasn't seen anything close to the same level of weekly discussions of stewarding as in the last number of seasons. With the Morbidelli penalties this week, what are your thoughts about stewarding this season and Simon Crafard's role generally versus previous seasons as it applies to this round or the whole year? So, start with Val for this one, because we often go to Simon first on stewarding matters. So let's start with Val. Did Morbidelli get punished enough for what happened with Vinales? Is the starting point for this, I think.
No, that one's very simple, very obvious. In fact, Morbidelli's internal sense of fairness clearly made him blow that first long lap and get the second long lap, and that still was not enough. I'm going to paint you the picture of the race. If Vinales had more pace, so if that overtake stuck, which again, it's Maverick, so you never know, but if that overtake stuck beyond that moment on the track, Franco Morbidelli was going to finish 6th at best, I think, given also Fabio Di Giannantonio's late race pace, maybe 7th, because Marco Bezzecchi seemed to have something about him, and Morbidelli seemed to be having his usual sort of slightly questionable race pace over the full distance. Maybe 6th, maybe 7th. With the double long lap, he ended up 6th. I think it was objectively a net positive for him to fire off Maverick Vinales into the gravel at turn 4. It could have objectively helped his race, which to me, that tells me that something in the penalty system is broken. Something is not fit for purpose. I don't know how to fix it. This is not a question of a repeat offense. We discussed this, Simon, that, question of penalty points, etc. And you'll get to that in a second. But for me, it's not even a matter of Morbidelli being a repeat offender. I understand the approach by Simon Crayfar's stewarding panel this season that, it's a clean slate. They've deemed Morbidelli a first offender on this particular topic. They decide that, the impeding in qualifying is a different offense to this, clearly. So we're not going to stack them on top of one another. I get that. I would, but I understand not doing it. But it's just, regardless of Morbidelli's prior, whatever, etc., it was actively beneficial for him to fire off Vinales there. It was good for his race. And the move was never on. I wasn't particularly impressed with how he discussed this post-race. He was like, I need to see the replay. I need to see the helicopter footage that doesn't exist.
The idea that he hadn't seen the replay, because he was the last debrief as well. He didn't do his debrief until the idea he hadn't seen the debrief was odd.
Yeah, I mean, my brother, you were in that moment. You did it. You were the one who,
we don't need to watch the onboard video. You have eyes.
You saw where you were coming into that corner relative to the bike that you came from a long way behind and crashed into.
Yeah. So again, maybe, I don't know, maybe you can look at that move and somehow say that, Vinales had left the space inviting a move, probably because Vinales just did not consider the possibility of being dive bombed from as far back as that happened. I'm not particularly sympathetic to that. I guess the space was there, but I don't think in that corner, at that type of, closing braking distance, I just don't think that's okay. I don't think you can place the onus on the other guy to then move out of the way if you're that far back. I think you're just having him off. And I don't know, maybe it would help a little bit if after one of these situations or races, Franco Morbidelli came to the media center and was like, I just had him off. I'm sorry, that's just what happened. I made a mistake instead of, I don't know, replay, onboard, helicopter. It just stinks that kind of stuff gets rewarded, which it was yesterday. I don't know. It also, I'm also a little annoyed for Vinales by how gracefully he took it. Yeah. Vinales was his usual. It doesn't matter because the pace was fantastic and we're going the right way. And the pace was fantastic. He was really good this weekend, apart from the whole part of overtaking other bikes, which was a bit of an issue. But the pace
only anger from the Vinales camp was a press release from Tech 3 that was clearly written by Hervé Poncharal himself.
The phrasing was great in that, wasn't it?
Yeah. The latest victim added to the big list is how they described it. I think Maverick should have also said something like that post-race, but that's just not how Maverick rolls. He immediately cooled off in the gravel trap. He did the one gesture with his hand, and he was like, "No, that's enough. That's bygones be bygones, etc." How can you be this chill about losing very likely your first podium of the season? I don't know.
Well, it would have been the second podium of the season he's lost, technically.
Yeah. Penalize Maverick for being too chill about it. Is the conclusion here?
Simon, you said you know how to fix this. How do we fix it?
First of all, right, I need to say part of this is I'm not going to say the fault of the stewards, but part of it lies with the stewards and part of it lies outside their hands. The bit that I think the stewards need to look at themselves is they have basically, like a judge in a court, they have sentencing guidelines, and they're too rigidly tied to them.
Agree.
Because the sentencing guidelines say first offense, this punishment, second offense, this punishment, and every offense you start at 0 for your first time. So there's a spreadsheet that says ending someone else's race, first offense, long lap penalty, and that's what he serves. Send him that message. And there has to be a bit more leniency within that to say, oh, no, that was super egregious. Bump him up to second offense, at least. Basically, even if you could give them the penalty that sits either side in the spreadsheet of the penalty that they have. Because I'm not saying a double long lap would have been sufficient to punish Morbidelli. And in the end, he did a double long lap anyway because he's a bit of a ditz whenever it comes to riding between two white lines painted on the ground.
You mean he's a crusader for justice and he deliberately did it, right?
It wouldn't have been an appropriate penalty, but at least we wouldn't be having the same level of anger at the stewards because of it, right? You know what I mean? At least it would have felt, if they had specifically said double long lap penalty, even though it's first offense because of the seriousness of the incident, at least you would have said, okay, they looked at that properly. As much as they can. But that I think they're a bit too tied to those guidelines at the minute. The bigger issue is the fact that it was essentially his first offense of the season, or the first offense of the past calendar year, whichever way you want to look at it, because he's never knocked anyone else off. He's just got in their way and tried to, jeopardize them in other ways repeatedly and whatnot. We need to bring in penalty points again.
Yeah.
We need a year-long penalty point system where we would have looked at his incident today and said 2 points in his license, and he would have already had probably 4 points in his license this season.
More, but okay, this season, 4.
It depends what criteria they put on. Qualifying.
But just say every incident is 2 points, right? Just use that as the kind of the minimum, and look. Or even if you say first offense is 1 point and repeat offenses is 2 points, and then look back over the last calendar year, because that's the way that other series, the way that MotoGP is used to, until someone got penalized and got sent to the back of the grid at Valencia 2015, and then we scrapped the system. I'm pretty sure that Franco would at least be starting a race in pit lane now, if not watching on from home.
Yeah,
and that would be fair.
Yes,
because that incident in itself was not race ban material. It wasn't black flag material, but the series of incidents we've seen from him over the past year makes me think he needs to spend a race at home. And the irony of this whole thing is that at Mugello this weekend, we saw a textbook example of the good that can do, because 12 months ago in the Red Bull Rookies Cup race, this young hotshot Spanish kid called Maximo Quiles pulled an insanely dangerous weave across the track on the run to the checkered flag, wiped out Roger Moodley, left Roger banged up, lucky to be avoided by other bikes. Stewart said, that is insanely dangerous. You've been told not to do that, 2-race ban. It cost him the Moto3 champion, or it cost him the Red Bull Rookies Championship. He somehow still graduated to Moto3 this year. He came to Mugello as the most calm and collected kid in the Moto3 Rookies this year, put on a textbook race, led out of the last corner, led across the line, did it in style, won the race, and admitted afterwards that the race ban partially contributed to him being a totally different person in the course of 12 months. Race bans work. Jorge Lorenzo, Andrea Giannantonio, race bans improve riders' ability to realize that we shouldn't do certain things.
Wow, you talk about race bans at lower levels there, aren't you then?
Iannoni's was a MotoGP race ban.
No, you're right.
Iannoni's was a MotoGP race ban.
Yeah, true.
Lorenzo's was a 250 ban.
I was looking at because F1 does it in the 12-month period, so just a year back, and I was sort of looking at it and trying to think of the F1 points that get assessed. I think, let's say, like impeding is maybe 1 point. Franco's done it a fair few times, but I don't think it should be more than 1 point. And
I disagree, because I think impeding on a bike is more dangerous than impeding in a car.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's we've seen what happens when you impede in a bike, and it can be horrendous.
I'm trying to play it conservative, but
I know.
Even if I do that, and let's say accident is 3 or 5, etc., I think he gets pretty close to the 12 of the race ban. I think he's in the conversation, certainly, if the F1 system existed here. For me, it's also just, there's a maximalist part of me that is, when you've had somebody off like that, there's a part of me that goes, you should finish where he finished. You cannot finish above him. You've tanked somebody else's race. You cannot materially benefit from that by beating that person. I know that's not enforceable. I know no stewarding panel in any motorsport series is going to go, all right, you're parked for the race because you just had somebody off. And that's, we're going to have like 10 bikes by the end of a race or something. Nobody wants that. That's bad for the people in the grandstands. That's bad for television. But it maybe is the fairest way to do it.
But I mean, we're not going to have 10 bikes left because there's a handful of people who do this repeatedly. And not, most of the grid don't do this on a regular basis.
No, well, this is a big thing for me. I've tried to kind of be patient with Morbidelli, and I've tried to not get onto a bandwagon with it. But when he says recently that I'm no worse than anybody else, I just get picked up on TV more, I don't think that's true, but you can try to get the benefit of that. And then amid all that, amid this run of like constant slatings for dawdling on the racing line, chopping people off in qualifying, amid so many things over the last year or two at least, where Morbidelli has been riding like he has no concept of where other bikes might be on the track, it just blats Vinales completely off the road in this race. Like, even if you think you're being unfairly targeted, you are in everyone's crosshairs over riding standards. That's the point at which you think, maybe I shouldn't just absolutely barge into someone from a mile back while battling on the cusp of the podium. He's not helping himself by doing stuff like this.
What's so funny about it is he's now got this thing where anytime anyone gets in his way, he highlights it in his media debrief afterwards. And the victim of his anger earlier in the weekend was Vinales.
Of course. Got a decent smattering of other business from this race as well, and I think Vinales should be the first element of it. Let's talk about what he was doing apart from being taken out. Yusuf Ahmed in the Members Club says, is Vinales better than ever right now? This is a consistent run of high-quality form. I would say he's been one of the best riders on the grid this season. It's more than just a 2-week Maverick purple patch. This is a proper renaissance. He's making Acosta look ordinary. Yusuf, Acosta won't like you saying that. I'm just going to chop that in now because Acosta did not take kindly to that kind of inference during his debrief. Val, I've got a feeling you might have been a bit positive about Maverick Vinales on occasions in your career. Is this the best form of his career?
No, he's always been this good. So no. No. I don't think so.
But in terms of consistently producing his best form?
No, because he's still maybe not as high up in the races as his pace warrants, and isn't that the most Maverick Vinales thing in the history of the world? No, he's just the same guy. I think he always was, but with a bike that plays slightly better to his strengths, which is very impressive because there were some doubts over whether the RC16 would work for what he likes, but instead it doesn't work for what teammate Nea Bastianini likes, but it seems to really, really work for Vinales. There's some suggestion that maybe this year the bike has changed a little bit in character to where it welcomes a more smooth corner speedy style, and suddenly that's a perfect marriage for Maverick Vinales. But I also think genuinely there's an Acosta conversation to be had. But Vinales is this good. He's this talented at his peak. I don't think it's unreasonable that a sophomore rider who's very highly projected comes up against Maverick Vinales and doesn't beat him every weekend. Because again, I think Maverick Vinales is just exceptionally talented, and I've always said that in the very narrow right circumstances that I've spoken about on this podcast, he is a MotoGP champion. I'm still confident of that. It's just they're very narrow. I don't think we'll see him.
Like a 7-race season.
Well, no, not a 7-race season. A season where all the other bikes are transparent and incorporeal. That's the one. That's the one, and you've got it. Man, and also there's a rolling start, so that's the two. Maybe no, this kind of becoming a running joke that I'm the big Maverick Vinales defender, but it's not some personal affinity or something. It's how I've viewed the talent and how I've tried to stick to my guns on that one. I think the guy I have seen generally over the years is this guy, and the one teammate he came up with and was outmatched by obviously, notably, was Fabio Quartararo, and that will happen because that's the guy. So, and for the rest, that doesn't tell you that Vinales doesn't have it. I think this season just underlines the fact that he has it.
So for me, I've always believed in the talent, and I've always been frustrated by the going missing, the poor starts, the not getting any progress. And for me, the Aprilia stint did probably more damage than anything else, because it just didn't really ever come. What I was waiting to happen with that relationship just never really developed, where he's come straight into KTM and looks his very best a lot of the time. Yeah, okay, I joke about 7 race seasons, I joke about him going missing and stuff, but actually, you are right. More often than not this season, he has looked really good. Simon, along with like where you stand on that, what's your take on him versus Acosta at the moment? Because Acosta was fairly unimpressed when he was questioned a little bit in his media debrief on Sunday. He quickly threw in that he has been the top KTM finisher in races ever since Le Mans. One, that's not actually that long a sample set, because Le Mans was last month. Two, what was Acosta's line? Like, you race until the finish, which is his way of defending the fact that Maverick was taken out well in front of him.
I think Acosta's under a hell of a lot more pressure than Maverick. Fundamentally.
Yeah.
Acosta is basically 2017 Maverick with a chip on his shoulder in the world to prove, and an amazing run of form to start his time, and then a blip and struggles and a bad bike and whatever. And I think that's the difference. We're seeing them respond in very different ways because they're in different situations. I mean, what is Maverick's sole goal for his time at KTM? Win a race and become the only rider to do it on another manufacturer. Pedro is here to be a 10-time world champion. Maverick's never going to achieve that now. And I think that what we're seeing is basically the two of them in that very different position with each other. And that's why Maverick can be Mr. Chill and Mr. I'll find another opportunity. I was never going to win on Sunday anyway, so who cares if I was knocked off, because the goal is only to win at the minute, to rack up that record. Whereas Pedro wants to fight his own shadow at every moment. He just, he needs to be winning. And it's not there. There's no sign of it being there. Maverick's going to win a race before him, and that's got to be sitting on him.
Yeah, Maverick is very much in anything as a bonus now territory in his career. I should say, yes, you both talked about how chill he was when he got to his debrief about the Morbidelli thing. That has reminded me that as he walked away in the gravel trap, he was furiously pointing at his head and eyes in Morbidelli's direction as a hint of using your eyes to see where other bikes might be.
Told Franco that in a gravel trap.
No, indeed. Simon Spies, or Simon Spies, don't know if you're related to Ben or not, said, where did Didier get this sudden burst of pace? Most of the season he seemed to be struggling more than the rest, and now suddenly has supreme speed. Do we know why?
Yeah.
Simon.
Mugello. The first place that Didier ever looked like a MotoGP rider rather than a bad gamble on a rookie was Mugello, with that amazing pole position out of nowhere. In his rookie season, and then that was like the only spark of form that year till he started working on Frankie Carcetti and changed his riding style and adapted a bit more to MotoGP. But I am entirely certain that it's just Mugello that's where that come from. It is one of his circuits.
He just kind of had a multi-round funk. This is fairly close to the Didier we saw at the start of the season, except the start of the season he was still pretty close to the whole preseason thing that happened to him stupidly. So he was paying the penalty a little bit for that, and then he's had this couple of rounds where just something was off on the front of the bike or whatever, etc. I'm surprised by this question, because I didn't even consider it in my head as a Didier outlier. I was like,
interesting.
This is
he's kind of Mr. Inconsistency, isn't he?
Yeah, it felt a step forward relative to this season, but he was like, I've seen glimpses of that this year at favorable tracks, so it's normal. It's within the range for me. I think we're gonna have to talk about Didier in the sense of having made like a really meaningful breakthrough when he's up there mingling with Mark and Alex in certain rounds. That needs to happen, for that to happen, he needs to sort qualifying. So,
well, this is it. As if you haven't seen Val's rider rankings, and if you're on Patreon, please barrage him with questions for him to answer in his debrief. Your vibe in the rider rankings is that actually this could have been a great Didier weekend if he'd sorted qualifying out.
Yeah, it still was a good one, but it could have been a great one.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Simon from the Members Club rather than Simon from the podcast on this. My expectations of Didier had nosedived through the first part of the year, because I really thought the Didier he'd turned himself into with all the progress he'd made over the previous season and a half was going to absolutely thrive when given this kind of unconditional Ducati back. Well, unconditional-ish, like still in a VR46 camp where he's conspicuously not VR46. But this was the ultimate endorsement of Digia, the MotoGP rider. He's the one who gets the top spec Ducati. And ignoring whether that top spec Ducati was a blessing or a curse for this season, I still wanted to see a bit more than I have. And actually, that late race burst at Mugello was a reminder of kind of what I'd come to expect from Digia generally. So I'd like to say, Val, this is like a look back in the middle of the season and figure out where we are with Digia. Frank Quinn says, what happened to Japanese bikes this weekend? I know Fabio Quartararo was shoulder strung. Fabio had a very big shunt at the start of the weekend. But in the main race, on every lap on the straights, he lost position, and no other rider on a Japanese bike was anywhere. What happened to all this recent progress? Am I right in thinking that we seem to have races where Yamaha and Honda are good, or races where KTM and Aprilia are good, and it's not really mixing and matching much? It's either the two European challengers look great and the Japanese two tumble, or vice versa.
And I think it's kind of related to top speed.
Yeah.
The KTM's the quickest bike in the grid.
Yeah.
And the Hondas were 15 Ks down.
Yeah.
And basically that's why they're nowhere. You know, all these problems that Joan Mir has been complaining about with speed is just magnified by being at Mugello, being the circuit with the longest drag of the year. And I think that's why the Hondas were nowhere. Plus they're missing one of their stars. Plus Zarco was a bit unlucky, kind of getting tangled up in other people's crashes and then having one of his own in the main race.
Yeah.
And the Yamahas just didn't really want to work this weekend. I think partly as well because of the temperature, super high track temperatures, which is obviously something they hate, and the speed issue just meant that the bike was chattering its brains out and burning the rear tire coming out of corners, which is like exactly what you expect from like the 2017 Yamaha that Maverick Vinales started complaining about. It's been a well-known issue that they've had for a long time.
I think Honda was bad this weekend, but maybe less bad. I suspect the individual riders have a bit of the blame to share, and I suspect that from looking at where Taka Nakagami was coming in. He looked right there with them generally, like a bit off, but maybe not as far off as you'd expect a part-timer to be. With
Definitely.
all due respect to Taka, and with the accounting for the fact that he's been told this weekend not to test so much, but to just treat it as a race rider weekend. But still, it's really hard to come in from the cold, and it didn't seem that hard for him this weekend, which makes me think that both Johan Zarco and Joan Mir left a little bit on the table in the various facets of the weekend. Not to say the bike was good. I do not think it was good, but I don't think it was like this totally hopeless. And the M1, the Yamaha M1, was only worth anything over one lap in Fabio's hands. It was an uncompetitive proposition in race trim.
Also one of the riders, this is his bogey track. Because stealing this stat from Australian journalist friend Matt Clayton, who pointed out via another friend of ours that Jack has scored 25 MotoGP championship points at Mugello.
Wow.
In his career. So, thank you, Matt and Renita, for that. What a stat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Long-time Ducati rider, Jack Miller, has had that score at Mugello.
That is not a lot.
Wow.
But I'm just looking like 15 crash, 16 crash, 17 15th, 18 crash, 19 crash. Didn't come in 2021 he finished 6th. 22 he finished 15th. 2023 finished 7th. 2024 he finished 16th. And 2025 he retired into the pits. So yeah.
Wow.
That does add a little bit of context to the fact that, for instance, I thought this was the first weekend this year where if Yamaha is still thinking, and I hope they are still thinking, I hope they are telling the truth on that one. This was the first weekend where I looked at it and I was like, actually, maybe keep Mugello over Miller. This was the first weekend where I felt it a little bit, but because it feels like Oliveira is finding some momentum on the M1, whereas Miller is where he has been from the very start of the season, which has been okay to good, but it's again the KTM story of there's no huge on the bike progression and like finding more and more relative to the runaway leader, which is Fabio Quartararo. But let's see that at a non-Mugello track clearly for Jack.
Yeah.
But I think that's a bit of a twist in that tale. But it's got to be like the whole situation with the M1 now, I imagine, has to be that it works its tires super well and super hard over one lap, and Quartararo can do magic, And then over race distance, that just does not help, especially in a place that's hot at Mugello with all the long corners and stuff. So I presume it's just, it was a bad fit, but also it's a bike that's being flattered by a qualifying overperformance this season now.
Yeah.
Which, at least, it's a nice change of pace, because it used to be the other way around. So,
along with Oliveira having a better race, the other person I wanted to highlight who's been under pressure but had what may be a kind of tangible renaissance is Val, your guy, Raul Fernandez. I feel like you've had more open faith in him than the rest of us have had. A little spoiler, if you haven't read rider rankings yet, he's quite high up. Is this a kind of a bit of tangible, believable form from Fernandez now? And where's it come from?
I mean, it's one weekend, but yes, I thought this was a really, really, really good one. And in fact, without looking into it too much, I struggle to remember a more complete, more well put together Raul Fernandez weekend than all of his time in MotoGP. But of course, it still had to include a Friday crash that compromised him a little bit in terms of the fitness for the rest of the weekend. It sounds like, well, he put it down to whatever they did at the post-Jerez test, basically, and the progress since. Like, he described that test as life-saving, but certainly, I think, career-saving is potentially true. The Aprilia has been updated quite a bit through the season. Seems like he's gelling with that. Seems he's very happy with the bike. He's able to basically do the high-speed corners better than at the start of the season. Or at the start of the season, he couldn't make much of them and couldn't exploit the thing that the Aprilia is good at. He was just pretty close to Marco Bezzecchi all weekend, and he held up well in races. That was my big concern after qualifying and practice was, well, the single lap is there, but Bezzecchi doesn't do great single lap. Is just the race going to fall apart? Is Fernandez going to go backwards? But the Aprilia RSGP looks more racy than it ever did before. It puts the power down on the ground very well. And Fernandez, even when his pace sagged, whether that's through fitness or the usual Raul Fernandez thing, he was able to hang on to the position that he needed to. It's promising. It looked good. I mean, we're grading on a curve a little bit. This should not be a surprise or this much of a revelation this far into his MotoGP career. I think that's important to say. But it's something to latch onto. It's something to where, you don't put the 26 deal into the shredder, the 26 part of it. So, that's all there is to say. This, it's one weekend, one genuinely really quite good weekend, but let's see it more sustained. If it is sustained, then finally, hooray.
Simon, are you convinced?
No, just because of the basically the history, but there is an element to Raul basically saying for a long time that he's felt like he's on the verge of a step and that the results haven't been there to back it up, and now the results are starting to be there to back it up. And I'm going to give him the benefit of doubt and see where it goes in the next few races. But it is like, at least he's kind of putting his money where his mouth is, finally. And it's been a long time coming. So, yeah, I mean, it bodes well. It does bode well. It hints that, yeah, maybe actually this is the start of something. It would need to be.
Yeah, indeed. Let's revisit this chat when Ayagura is not fresh back from an injury as well, and see how that comparison is looking. Right, Simon, you've got to get back home for 2 seconds before you head off to Assen instead, where we may... I've no part of me is thinking, let's go to Assen and see if that works out for Bagnaia after Mugello, but maybe we'll get a nice surprise and we'll see the first few laps of Mugello repeated over a longer distance, but I'm not holding out too much hope for that. Join us back here on the Monday morning after the Dutch TT, or Dutch Grand Prix as they just call it now, to find out what happens next in Mark and Alex being very polite to each other and Bagnaia hopefully having fewer things to be sad about.
I can't leave it on that note. It's the Dutch TT. Screw Dorna.